Knowing the types of intermolecular forces can often help us to predict whether or not two substances will be soluble in one another. For example, water and ethanol are miscible because both water and ethanol are polar molecules. By contrast, water and oil are immiscible because although water is polar, oil is nonpolar. This can be summarized using the well-known principle, like dissolves like. In other words, substances with similar intermolecular forces dissolve in one another. What this means is that polar molecules dissolve in other polar molecules, and nonpolar molecules dissolve in other nonpolar molecules. In this question, we are asked to predict whether or not propanol and butanol are miscible. As we can see, both compounds have a similar chemical structure, a hydrocarbon chain for each, followed by a hydroxyl group at the beginning of each molecule. Now that hydroxyl group that's common to both molecules is a polar functional group, and we can see that more clearly by rewriting the structures in this way, where R represents our hydrocarbon chain and the OH group represents our hydroxyl group. As we can see from this Lewis structure, the hydroxyl group, the oxygen in the hydroxyl group, has a Vesper class of AX2E2. The molecule therefore has a bent shape, and as a consequence, the molecule is polar. So, the intermolecular forces in propanol and butanol are both dipole-dipole interactions, and as a consequence, we would expect the molecules to be miscible with each other. Some molecular structures result in conflicting intermolecular forces. For example, fatty acids, phospholipids, and soaps all contain both polar and nonpolar regions. The example we have here is oleic acid, which is a fatty acid. We can see from the diagram that oleic acid has a polar region as well as a long hydrocarbon chain structure, which is nonpolar. The diagram we see here is what is known as a bond line structure, where the section where two lines intersects represents a carbon atom. So in this case, we have a 17-chain hydrocarbon. Soap takes advantage of dual polarity. Soap is a salt of a fatty acid, as we can see here. So the structure of soap is such that it consists of a polar head group, which we can see here, which is soluble in water through ion-dipole interactions, and a nonpolar long-chain hydrocarbon, which we see here, which is soluble in grease. So the structure of soap allows it to form micelles, where the hydrophobic portion dissolves grease and oils and surrounds them in the middle, while the hydrophobic portion, represented by the circles or spheres, is polar and allows it to be washed away with water. Phospholipids, which are very important in biological systems, also take advantage of dual polarity. Phospholipids are composed of a hydrophilic phosphate head, which is soluble with water, and two hydrophobic aliphatic tails. When mixed together, phospholipids self-assemble into sheet-like structures called a lipid bilayer, with the tails of the two layers pointing toward each other and the heads of the phospholipids pointing towards water. This lipid bilayer is what comprises typical cell membranes.